going to start right now, and I'll point at you when it connects and says we're live.
Hey everybody, I'm Eve Samples. I'm the Opinion and Audience Engagement Editor here at TCPalm. We are live here on election night. I've got Gil Smart with me. Welcome, Gil.
Thank you, Eve. We're here till at least 9 o'clock, maybe a little bit after that. We're hopefully going to have some breaking election results for you here. Local races as well as races of statewide importance. And we're going to start. Eve's going to set the table here for us with some races to watch statewide.
That's right. Before I jump into that, I want to mention that we've got reporters and photographers in the field tonight. We'll be covering all of our most important local races. And our statewide network will be following, of course, the governor's race and the U.S. Senate race. So as we have results in all of these, we'll be jumping into this broadcast and offering some analysis and also be joined by some of our journalists. So goal tonight is not to guess who's going to win anything. We are not going to call races until we have ironclad evidence that they are official. And we're also going to be joined by Rich Campbell, Anthony Westbury, and Larry Reisman via Skype from Indian River County to talk about what's going on in their respective counties, as well as Ali Schmitz, our politics reporter, and George Andriossi, who's also covering some political races for us. So on that note, if you've got questions, please ask them in the chat on Facebook. We will try to address them as we can. And I'm going to talk about a few races to watch. So, of course, do I even have to mention the governor's race and the U.S. Senate race? I think we all are watching that very closely across Florida tonight. Andrew Gillum and Ron DeSantis in a very close race, as well as Rick Scott, our outgoing governor, is in a tight race with Bill Nelson for the U.S. Senate seat. So we don't expect those results until late tonight because both of those are looking very close, but we'll be watching them in our local counties as results roll in. More locally, probably the biggest race to watch in the southern half of the Treasure Coast is in District 18, the seat currently held by Congressman Brian Mast. He's got a strong challenger in Lauren Baer. We'll see if she's able to oust the incumbent tonight or not. Also, Florida Senate District 25. This is outgoing Senate President Joe Negron's seat. He's leaving his post because of term limits, and now that this is a contest between Gail Harrell, a longtime state representative, and Robert Levy, the Democrat who's challenging her. And two more to watch tonight. We've got Florida House District 83. This is the seat that Gail Harrell is leaving, and it's now a contest between Republican Toby Overdorf, he's a local biologist and consultant, and Matt Theobald, who's a local river advocate and high school teacher. And finally, District 54, this one's not real close in terms of the demographics of the district, but this is a seat held by State House Representative Erin Grahl, and she has a strong Democratic challenger in Nicole Hagenson. So that's kind of what we're looking at on the state scene. Gil, what are you watching locally?
We've got several important races at the county level in all three Treasure Coast County. In Martin County, there's one race. It's the County Commission District 2 race. It's Stacey Hetherington versus Joe Banfi. There are also two referendums on the ballot in Martin County, both having to do with the Martin County schools. The first would authorize a half-cent sales tax to be used for school construction. The second asked voters for the fifth or sixth time in the past 20 years whether they would like the Martin County Superintendent of Schools to be appointed rather than elected, as is currently the case. In St. Lucie County, there are two county commission races. In District 2, you've got Anthony Bonner versus Sean Mitchell. Bonner's a Republican incumbent who was appointed in March, replaced Todd Mowry, who resigned in January. Democrat Mitchell is a member of the County Planning and Zoning Board. In District 4, we have Franny Hutchison, Republican incumbent seeking her third consecutive term against Helen Henderson, a Democratic newcomer. She's a professor of criminal justice at Kaiser University. There's also a half-cent sales tax referendum on the ballot in St. Lucie County for road repairs, sidewalks, and water quality projects to benefit the river. If approved, it would bring the sales tax rate up to 7%, generate about $18.6 million a year for the county. Lastly, in Indian River County, we have two school board races. Both are runoffs. In District 2, it's Mershon Green versus Jacqueline Rosario. In District 4, it's Stacey Lynn Klim versus Terry Barenberg. There's a county judge race, Nicole Menz versus Robin Stone, notable because whoever wins will replace retiring Judge Joe Wild and will become the first woman elected by Indian River County voters as judge. There's city council races in Sebastian, Fellsmere, Indian River Shores, and Vero Beach, but the Vero Beach election results will not count for now due to a legal challenge. So we've got a full plate here tonight.
We do. That Vero challenge is kind of a wild card this election. Folks will have it on their ballot, but those results will not count. So lots of interesting things to watch tonight. And just an interesting election overall statewide. You know, one reflection of that is the number of early votes cast. A record 5.1 million early voters in Florida. That's a record for a midterm election. That exceeded the previous record in 2014 by almost 2 million votes. Pretty incredible. In early voting, so before the polls closed half an hour ago, before today, Democrats had a slight edge of about 20,000 votes statewide. Of course, we know that could change today. And that total also included more than 220,000 younger voters who sat out in 2014. So a lot of these quote-unquote infrequent voters are jumping into this election. So clearly, this one has the interest of a lot of folks who aren't typically involved in politics, much less midterm elections. Why do you think that is, Gil?
Well, clearly this election has been sort of touted as a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency. And sort of at the federal level, that may in fact be true. Democrats are very motivated to get out and vote against him. Republicans, particularly after the Kavanaugh hearings, the Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh hearings, they're also motivated to get out and vote. But I wonder how that's going to impact some of these state-level races. There's been a push for both sides to get out as much of the vote as possible, and it's worked. I mean, I can say personally that the number of people, I went to vote early on Friday afternoon, and I was astounded at the number of people who were there. This is at the Hoke Library in Jensen Beach here in Martin County. I've never seen that many people at a polling place on Election Day proper, and here we were several days before the election. There was a line. Every single one of the booths where you mark your ballot was filled. It was nuts, and it's been that way pretty much for the last couple of weeks. There's a huge amount of interest in this election. It's being seen, I think, nationally as sort of a pivot point. There's been a lot of talk about a blue wave. Will that materialize tonight? Will it come to pass in the U.S. House of Representatives, in the Senate? It's going to be hard to say, but it's going to be interesting to see how our local results here play a part in some of those broader themes.
It will. I think certainly the governor's race in Florida is being seen as a proxy nationwide for what you're talking about. And to some degree, District 18, the congressional seat in the southern Treasure Coast, is a reflection of that too. So we'll be watching those results very closely. But before we get to those, we are going to have Rich Campbell join us in a few minutes to talk about the statewide constitutional amendments that are on the ballot. So some of you may have been confounded by that, so we're going to jump in and talk about that in just a few. Actually, I think Rich is here to join us. So come on in, Rich.
Thanks, Eve.
How's it going?
It's going good. And I know you just teased amendments, but I bring what could be the big Martin County story.
Tell us more.
I went to martinvotes.com and checked some voting totals, and most of the races are going as you would expect in highly Republican Martin County. All of the state, Senate, and House races, Republicans are leading. This is still incomplete voting, but there may be trends starting to form. Stacey Hetherington has what seems to be a substantial lead over Joe Banfi in the District 2 Commission race. But the early headline may be appointed school superintendent.
Really?
Yeah, as both of you know well, Martin County, people in Martin County have tried at least five different times to get voters to approve an appointed school superintendent. We elect our superintendents here. And at this point, with 47,000 votes counted, the appointed superintendent referendum is up 60 to 40%.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing in that, as Rich said, there have been so many previous attempts to do this, and Martin County voters have voted it down every time, preferring to keep the power to select the school superintendent in their own hands. But proponents of this year, they launched a campaign, although the campaign seemed to have petered out a little bit in recent months. Frankly, you didn't hear a whole lot about this. There were still proponents of it out there making their case, but it certainly didn't make a lot of headlines, unlike some of the other things going on.
Which, when you understand the history, is kind of ironic, because in the past, at least the past 2 or 3 times that it's been proposed, there was a massive push, and voters, each time it got a little closer to passage, but voters ultimately said no. And this time, it's almost as if it's kind of snuck in under the radar. And at this point, if those totals hold up, Looks like we could have an appointed superintendent.
So nothing confirmed yet, but potentially could go a different direction.
Right.
And there are pros and cons to both of those for sure. We just ran a guest column the other day from a local assistant superintendent who was very much for having an elected superintendent, continuing that, and he thinks that an appointed superintendent is good for big counties where you may draw talent that sticks around. There's a risk in a smaller county of it becoming kind of a stepping stone to a bigger, higher-paying job elsewhere. So we'll see how that shakes out, but it would certainly be historic if it holds up.
And while we're on Martin County referendums, looks like the half-cent sales tax is looking pretty good too.
Interesting.
Yeah, 48,000 ballots have been cast there, and it's got 56% yes.
Wow. I mean, that's been a huge push for this. You can't drive past a Martin County school without seeing signs out there for it. You can't go to a Martin County school website without seeing a big, informational sort of thing about this as well. This money would be used in large part for school construction, for replacement schools, 2 new elementary schools in Jensen Beach and Palm City. Also, the schools need to make significant security upgrades. If this passes, it's going to generate millions of dollars for these projects. The danger was that if it didn't pass, then Martin County was going to have to make some hard decisions about what they were going to do about these facilities in the future. So everybody's watching these results closely.
And we just got some breaking news from our digital producer behind the camera, Hannah Schwab. Martin County results are 100% reported, so we'll check back up on the tallies in those races. We should start to be able to call some specific races for you shortly here, but definitely some changes in the air, it sounds like.
Yeah, and we should note it's just like election supervisor Vicki Davis to get those results in as quickly as they do in Martin County.
Always very timely. It's 40 minutes after polls closed,
Wow.
and she's all squared away. So, of course, we'll have to wait on the rest of the state for the gubernatorial results, U.S. Senate results. We've got the Panhandle in another time zone. And we'll have to wait on them for the amendment results. So we definitely want to talk to you about that too, Rich. So we had 12 amendments on the ballot, 13 as they're numbered. Really confusing for voters. I confess that even I had to bring a crib sheet in to vote, and we've talked about these things at length. So what's your take on the amendments this election year?
Well, how much time do I have?
Not that much.
Let me make a couple points. At least from my perspective, the amendments face an uphill challenge because unlike local referendums, they require 60% voter approval for passage. And I tend to believe voters are generally going to vote no to things that they don't understand or things that they find unclear. And when you look at the 12 amendments that are on the ballot today, Amendments 6 through 11 are bundled. The Constitution Revision Commission placed those on the ballot. Those amendments contain multiple and in some cases unrelated issues that voters are trying to make decisions on. But I also think that voters tend to vote for their pocketbooks and their passions. And kind of with those things as guiding principles, I think there are 5 amendments that stand a good chance of passage. Okay. And I'll hit those quickly. Amendments 1 and 2 deal with homestead and non-homestead exemptions. They're essentially tax breaks for people that own property in Florida. That's a pocketbook issue. I can see both of those passing. Amendment 6 is the first of the bundled issues. It has 3 separate issues contained in that one amendment, but the one that has gotten a lot of attention, and many of us, if not all of us, have seen Kelsey Grammer's commercial on the victims' rights for crime victims. That's one of those passion issues. Each of us can see ourselves or a family member as a crime victim at some point. So I think there's a lot of interest out there for that amendment. So that's 1, 2, and 6. Amendment 9, which would ban offshore drilling. Floridians are passionate about protecting our beaches. That's another bundled amendment. You're going to have to decide if you want to ban offshore drilling and vaping indoors. But I can see a lot of Floridians saying yes to banning offshore drilling. And then the final one that I think has a good shot of passing is Amendment 13, which would ban commercial greyhound racing everybody loves dogs except those who happen to be cat people. But there's still a lot of dog lovers out there. We've seen the commercials. I think those five could be passed. But let me finish by saying this: as confident as I may feel about my analysis, I took a peek at how Martin County voters are voting on the 12 amendments. Every one of them is being approved, some by huge margins in Martin County. Well, I need to catch myself. I forgot about the 60%. I need to go back and look at those again. I may be completely off base because I forgot what I said at the opening. It takes 60% to pass. So everything I just said about that, forget it.
Forget everything. 2 points. Let me make 2 points. Number one, the Homestead Amendment is interesting because if it passes, municipal and county governments throughout Florida are going to take a revenue hit. I mean, they just are. It's something that I'd like to just sort of delve into in a column here because in some cases it's going to be significant. They're going to have to make up that revenue somehow or they won't, and services may have to be cut. Right. The other point is there's an element of frivolity to some of this. The idea that we're going to pair offshore drilling with vaping in a constitutional amendment. Yeah. And you have to ask the question, should laws regulating vaping be written into Florida's Constitution? Obviously, voters are going to decide that, but it seems a bit sort of odd.
And then, in the interest of transparency, we should note that our editorial board, which all three of us sit on, recommended against all bundled amendments because we think they're so confounding and can be misleading. And to be frank, on Amendment 9, in the case of offshore drilling and vaping, we took a lot of heat for that because our editorial board does stand for banning offshore drilling in state waters. We just don't think it should be written into the Constitution in the manner it was proposed. Right. So real confusing issues for voters. I think it did take folks at the voting place a little longer to fill out their ballots today. But to your point, Vicki Davis got the results tabulated pretty quickly in Martin, and I guess we're still waiting on the other counties to roll in. We've got a few results behind us here.
Yeah. Great.
So thanks, Rich. Will you come back and talk to us later tonight?
I'll definitely come back, and maybe I can have a little more information on the amendments.
Sounds
good.
See
how they're doing.
Great.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a
bit. All right.
So next up, we're going to check in with Anthony Westbury. He is our St. Lucie County columnist. He's going to talk about some of the key races there in our middle Treasure Coast County. As Gil mentioned earlier, we've got 2 county commission races, and we're going to welcome Anthony on set now. He's just meandering into our studio here at TCPalm, where the scent of pizza is still in the air.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good evening. I am meandered in, yes.
So what are you seeing in St. Lucie County tonight, Anthony?
Well, about half the precincts, 34 out of 64, reporting. Early on, there was a very strong, the people were voting by party line. It was all Democrats. Now the Republicans are catching up in some cases. And I heard Rich talk about the amendments. Every single one in St. Lucie County is way over 60%. So I'd be surprised if they change that much. But maybe, And that includes one of the races I'd like to talk about, which is the sales tax.
Yeah, let's jump into that. What's so important about that vote?
Well, it's intended to address a $600 million backlog in road repairs and sidewalks not being built and water quality projects that the county and the cities have said cannot be addressed in any other way. The bill is just simply too big. And the county is now operating, I think roads ideally need redoing every 25 to 30 years. In the county, in St. Lucie County, it's every 75 years. And I would say in my city of Fort Pierce, it's probably closer to 100 years. So they need to do something about it. And if they don't, voters don't pass this, either we just put up with terrible streets for another 20 years or whatever, or taxes will go up.
Let me jump in right there because we have some breaking results. Gil,
we do. Martin County, the commissioner's race in District 2, Stacey Hetherington is the winner in this race over no party affiliate Joe Banfi. Hetherington is the Republican candidate. She vastly spent her opponent. She raised a lot more money than her opponent, Banfi. You've probably seen her large signs around town for quite some time. She is the winner, Martin County District 2. It's going to alter the dynamic of the Board of County Commissioners a little bit. She's being seen as a little more friendly to growth. Banfi would have been sort of an anti-growther, sort of in the mold of Commissioner Ed Fielding, who Hetherington will now replace. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this affects the overall balance of the board and its attitude toward growth and development in Martin County. So let's talk a little bit more about this post-sales tax increase in St. Lucie County. Correct me if I'm wrong, voters have turned this down in the past, haven't they?
2014, yes. They have to get 50% plus one vote, and back then it got 43%. Most notably, Port St. Lucie, biggest area of voters, voted almost unanimously no on it. And one of the reasons people think is that there was a voter fatigue. The year before that, Port St. Lucie had raised property taxes by 18%. And I think voters decided they weren't going to vote for any other tax in the near future. Since then, Port St. Lucie is, over 3 years, has reduced its its millage rate. And I think this is better organized this time. The projects themselves are very clearly delineated for all the municipalities. And in Port St. Lucie, they took a vote, an informal vote with residents, and they found out that their preferences were to improve intersections in St. Lucie West, first of all, which I found slightly surprising, but plus a lot of sidewalks. They hope to have, if it goes through, at least 10 years' worth of sidewalks fixed within the first couple of years. So Fort Pierce is concentrating on very old streets, as we mentioned, and the county is some highways, including Prima Vista in St. Lucie County, which is in the county, but also some water projects, stormwater projects in Lakewood Park, which flooded very badly during Irma. So,
and you've got 2 county commission races that are pretty important this time around. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. District 2 on the county commission is between incumbent Anthony Bonner and challenger Sean Mitchell. Bonner is a Republican. He is called the incumbent, but technically I guess he's not really. He was appointed to that position by Governor Scott in April after Commissioner Todd Lowry stepped down for personal reasons. So this is his first election. He won the Republican primary quite handily, and he's up against a union man, Sean Mitchell, the Ironworkers Union. Their views on the big key issues are very similar, actually. They're both strong jobs advocates, especially Mitchell. Water quality, school security, and they have the one sort of argument factor was campaign financing. Mitchell got a lot of union money and from outside the area, and Bonner was very critical of that.
Do you think, sorry to interrupt, but do you think much will change on the commission, the direction of the commission, in terms of who's elected tonight? No?
Not a great deal. The commission is 3-2 Democrat to Republican, even if it changed to 4-1, which I think is probably, if Mitchell wins this, I don't think it would change much. I don't think party politics has ever played a big role in that commission. So.
And the other race is Franny Hutchinson.
The other race is District 4, Franny Hutchinson, who's been there for 16 years, and is a sort of centrist type of Republican. A lot of local support, and she's a pretty tough cookie. She's well known in Tallahassee and in Washington. She pushed very, very hard for the Artie D. Copas VA nursing home in tradition when it looked like it wasn't going to happen, and I give her a lot of credit for that. Helen Henderson is her Democratic challenger. She's a teacher with Kaiser University, teaches criminal justice and homeland security, and made a pretty good impression, I think, on the editorial board during her interview. She was particularly interested in income disparities in St. Lucie County, which is a big issue. But she didn't come up with any plans on how to fix them. And I think that Hutchinson was much better informed.
So we don't have any official results in those races.
Not
We'll
yet.
be watching
Not
them
yet.
as we go on.
Yeah.
But on that note, we do have some official results in the town of Sewell's Point here in Martin County.
Right.
We have two winners, James Campo and David Kurzman, are winners in the town of Sewell's Point on the town commission. So we've got live results coming in. We just announced the Martin County Commission winner, Stacey Hetherington. We'll continue to update you on results as the night goes on.
In Sewell's Point, Campo was the incumbent. Kurzman was one of two, what I called insurgents, who were challenging him, and the septic to sewer conversions in Sewell's Point were a huge issue. Kurzman and another guy who was running, Johnny Cowboy Connor, I believe his name was, were part of a group of residents who had opposed the septic to sewer conversions. That project has been scaled back drastically, in part as a result of the opposition, but it remained a hot political button issue, and Campo was one of the leading persons to push septic to sewer, so he became a bit of a target in Sewell's Point, but he has survived. He will serve another term on the commission. Kurzman now joins the commission, the town commission as well, so it's going to be interesting to see what the dynamic is there with that new blood there.
Right, absolutely. Anthony, while we have you here, can we ask you about one state house race, Larry Lee's successor? Larry Lee opted not to seek another term in the state legislature, so he's got a couple of folks who are vying to replace him. What's your take on what's at stake in that race for the community?
Well, Dolores Hogan Johnson is his designee. She's a Democrat. She has a very well-rounded resume. She's been an environmental activist for 3 decades, before it was cool. And she's also knows a lot about healthcare, and I can't remember the other one, honestly. But she's a pretty well-rounded candidate. Mark Gotts, who is challenging her on the Republican side, is a big supporter of charter schools and small government, and that seems to be his whole campaign. I remember we were asking him during the candidate interviews about the environment. Sorry, that's the other one. And he didn't think there was an environmental problem, and he did not even seem to know that environmental regulations have been relaxed under Governor Scott, and there were a lot of people out of work at the DEP because of him on the South Florida Water Management. So we recommended against him. It's pretty close.
Yeah,
St. Lucie County. Yeah.
Hannah was just noting, Hannah, our behind-the-camera producer, that this race is very close right now, at least. Mark Gotts is slightly behind with 49.3% of the vote, while Dolores Hogan Johnson has 50.69% of the vote. So, of course, we're still waiting for those final results to be tallied, but as of right now, Dolores Hogan Johnson has a slight lead there. We'll be watching those results for the rest of the night.
Yeah.
Will you pop back in and chat with us again later this evening?
Since you asked so nicely.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind of you. All right. Thanks for chatting with us, Anthony.
Thank you.
We'll see you later. So if you have questions and you're watching us on Facebook, please pose them in the questions, and we will do our best to address them. If not, you can listen to Gil and I chime in here on the results as they roll in tonight. We're still waiting for statewide races. So far, we have a few local races called, and we'll continue to update you on that.
Yeah, to reiterate, in Martin County, County Commissioner District 2, Stacey Hetherington has defeated Joe Banfi. In Sewell's Point, the winners are for the Town Commission are James Campo and David Kurzman.
That's right. And we do have 100% of results in Martin County tabulated. So actually, maybe we should take a look at those before we are joined by Larry Reisman. We can pull up the Martin County results here, and we can take a look at some of those referenda we were talking about. We've got the appointed versus elected school superintendent referendum in Martin County. And that will be of note, as well as the sales tax for school improvements, notably Palm City Elementary and Jensen Beach Elementary.
Right. You know, and this is the second time this year that the Martin County School District has gone to voters seeking a tax increase. In the August 28th election, voters approved a tax increase that's going to be used primarily to raise teacher pay and for some other issues as well. That was a property tax increase. This is a sales tax increase, a proposed sales tax increase. And what are we seeing here?
Well, so So far, we don't have the local results on this page, but we will strive to pull it up and get that to you. That's
It
right.
would be surprising, I think, if Martin County voters approved a second tax hike in 1 year. Martin County voters have approved tax hikes in the past, but they've also voted down several in recent years. But the school board did a very good job, in my opinion, of making the case for why this tax for the school replacements was needed. They were able to quantify the need, and they got the word out very efficiently to voters around the county. There's always going to be people who don't want to pay more taxes. It's an understandable impulse, but the need was definitely there. So it's going to be interesting to see if Martin County responds to that. Rich Campbell, who was on with us earlier, indicated that early results showed that it was heading in that direction.
Yeah, so I am looking at some early results here from Martin County now, and we have, of course, no surprise, Rick Scott just in Martin County leading Bill Nelson with 60% of the vote to 39%, with Bill Nelson just in Martin County, not statewide. Brian Mast carried Martin County alone very easily, 64% of the vote, 35%. We'll still have to wait on district-wide results. And we're looking at some of the other results here. Of course, Ron DeSantis, too, also looking strong. In Martin County, we will zoom out and get the full statewide picture later.
Right.
So as we look deeper in those local results, we'll chime back in. But first, we want to bring Larry Reisman, our Indian River County columnist, on. And he's going to join us via Skype. And there he is. Hey Larry. How you doing?
Good listening. You guys are doing a good job.
Thanks. We can see and hear you loud and clear. Larry's in our Vero Beach newsroom. And what are you watching tonight? What's going on up in Indian River County?
There are an array of issues so far. I think really the mail ballots are just about 48,000 ballots, 49,000 ballots have been cast, and that's maybe it's about more than half. And really, there are no surprises, in my opinion, whatsoever, other than I thought the Democrats might have a better showing, but they don't seem to be, really faring much better than they have in the past in many of the races. There are a lot more people voting. As I said, I think it's 40% over 4 years ago. But the Republicans, from the top of the ticket to the bottom of the ticket, are doing well. The school board race has kind of become a partisan issue. Stacey Clem in the one race is a little bit closer. Those are fairly close, but 10 percentage points difference the last time I looked is not really that close. So it looks like the Republicans are doing real well. Just out of curiosity, I looked to see how DeSantis is doing. DeSantis and Gillum compared to 4 years ago in this county, when you had Charlie Crist was the Democrat at the time running against Rick Scott. DeSantis has still got about the same percentage of votes as Scott did, but Gillum's got a few more percent. He's basically taking points off the board that the Libertarian candidate got 4 years ago. I'm just trying to look at that to see how that might play out statewide. But, I think Indian River County is still a solid Republican. The Democrats had a big gain in the primary, getting in one of their candidates in a school board race, although it is a nonpartisan race. So they got one of their candidates in there, and they got two to the runoff in the other two races.
Larry, I know in Martin County, the number of it's heavily Republican county. There's about roughly twice as many Republican registered as there are Democrats, but there's almost as many independents as there are Democrats. What's the case up in Indian River County with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gilly. I actually pulled those numbers a couple minutes ago. There are almost 29,000 independents and about 31,000 Democrats, and then about 52,500 Republicans. So, you'd think that if the independents all swung one way or the other, there'd be a big change. But the independents, just looking at the number, I just did a little analysis before, and the independents seem to be swinging, at least as of the early results, they seem to be swinging 50-50. So that's interesting.
That is.
So, Larry, you guys have a really odd situation with the Vero Beach City Council election there tonight. So people are voting in that election, but the results will not count, right?
They temporarily won't count until the judge finally rules. So I guess what will happen is the county runs the election. They'll take the election. They'll publicize the numbers online. And right now, I think the two incumbents are leading. It's Laura Moss and Tony Young, and then in third place for the third seat is Robert Brackett. You would think they might be the favorites anyway. They've got a decent lead over Bob McCabe. But then Linda Hillman would be the fifth candidate in the race, and I'm not sure if Brian Haiti would be able to get in the race. But really, what will happen, I guess, is that on Friday there'll be another hearing. We'll see, what the effect of this is. But this election, is sort of on hold until the judge figures out, whether there should be a special election.
Okay. Have you ever seen anything like that happen in Indian River County before?
No, there's been other, really strange things, but nothing like this. We had a candidate elected, several years ago. There's a candidate named Charlie Wilson. He was elected, took office, and then, somebody filed suit saying he didn't really live in the city. And so Judge Paul Canarac, same judges in this case, he disqualified Charlie Wilson. So I think they ended up appointing, I can't remember if they appointed or had another election to replace Charlie Wilson. So there's been some weird things. We've had candidates elected with there've been ties, so they've drawn straws. That was up in Fellsmere a couple of years ago. I think one of the places flipped a coin. So there's been some other strange things, but nothing quite like this.
Maybe they can use a Ouija board next time. I like that idea. So.
Yeah, well, it seems like all these strange stories come out of Florida, and this is no different. The things that have gone on in the city of Vero Beach in recent weeks, I keep saying it's like a Carl Hiaasen novel. You just never know what's going to happen.
Larry, the school board elections here, whatever the outcome is it going to change the dynamic on the school board at all? Is it going to change the direction of the school district, do you think?
I think right now you're going to have a pretty close. Depends who gets elected, right? And we don't have the final results in. But assuming the people that are leading now, you're going to have three newcomers. The two incumbents, I think there's a lot of sentiment against sort of the superintendent and the way the school district has operated. But if there's an election, I think you're going to probably have 2.5 to 2.5. I think there's going to be a lot more oversight of the school district. But whether the superintendent stays or goes, I think it'll be pretty close. Depends who is the loudest. There are a couple of people that. Laura Zork and Jackie Rosario, people running, from what I've heard, from what they've said, they don't seem too happy with the superintendent. Then you've got three other people that, seem to be a little bit more restrained in how they talk about him.
Hey, Larry, why weren't there any county commission seats up for grabs this year? No opponents?
Well, depending upon who you listen to, they're doing an incredible job, if you listen to the commissioners. And that's why nobody ran against them. So there were no primaries, nothing. Two seats were open. That was Peter O'Brien and Joe Flesher. So it's pretty quiet. Yeah, it's really been a pretty quiet election. We do have a state house race. Erin Brawl is up for re-election. She won 2 years ago. She's running against Nicole Hagenson, who's, I think, a good candidate. And then the other race is a congressional race. Bill Posey is running against Sanjay Patel. And if you look at those races, it looks like, consistently over the years, that's early results again. But if you look at how the results are coming in, they're faring about the same as many of the other Democratic candidates, perhaps a little better.
In Indian River County.
Again, are in the lead in those races.
Right, and Posey occupies a heavily Republican seat in District 8 in Congress, so that's a long shot by Patel, but we'll see what the night holds.
Yeah.
And same with Erin Grawl's seat. But like you said, Hagenson was about as strong a Democratic challenger as we've seen in Indian River County in a long time.
But as we talked about earlier, that's we got 52, more than 52,000 Republicans, more than 31,000 Democrats, and then you get all these independents, and if you can pull all those independents, Democrat has a chance. But if you can't get almost all of them, and people are voting party lines, not that that's always the case, but that's an uphill climb.
Yeah. So Larry, when we kicked this off tonight, we were talking about the issues at hand this election, why turnout has been so strong statewide and locally, And Gil was talking a bit about this election being a referendum on Trump to some degree. What did you hear in Indian River County in terms of what mattered most? Did folks view it that way? Was it more local issues that you heard them voting on?
Yeah, I think the school board race is obviously different, but when you look at the congressional race and when you look at the House race, the state House race, I think it's the same thing. I don't know if it's a referendum on Trump so much. I think the anti-Trump forces use that to just round up their troops, and I think if you look at the numbers at the end of the night, they probably have done a really good job bringing the voters out. At the same time, I think the primary was somewhat of a wake-up call for the Republicans to get their troops out. And so I think that's, I think on one hand, I think Trump woke up the Democrats to some extent, but at the same time, based on the primary, I think the Republicans said, look, we're going to get our butts kicked if we're fat, dumb, and happy. So we need to get our voters out. And I think they really made a real big effort. They did a lot. The Republican Executive Committee here did a lot of advertising over the past month or so, which they didn't do any of, as I understand, in the fall, in the summer election. So I think this fits in with the national narrative. The question is, can the Republicans everywhere, get their loyalists out to vote?
Right. That makes sense. So as results roll in tonight, will you pop back in with us and chat with us again later when we've got some more tangible results to talk about?
Definitely. Hopefully they'll be in.
All right, Larry. Thanks.
Larry.
Stick around. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. All right, so I'm going to minimize Larry here, figuratively.
Now that actually brings up an interesting point. What's the one thing we can count on tomorrow? A lot of these election results now are still in question. What's the one thing we know for sure tomorrow? Those political mailers that have been filling your mailbox will finally come to an end.
And text messages, for
and
sure.
phone calls.
Yes. So that'll be a welcome relief. So we do have some results to update you on, and we're going to recap some of what we've heard already. 100% of the votes has been tallied in Martin County, one of our 3 counties we cover, and that means the school board sales tax has been approved, the half-cent sales tax, and by a pretty good margin, 57% to 42%.
That's roughly what the margin was for the property tax hike earlier in the year. I'm stunned. Frankly, I am stunned. I would not, initially when the school board announced that they were going to do 2 asks for tax increases this year, I thought they were crazy. I thought there was no way in the world it was going to pass. No way are you going to get Martin County voters to sign off on 2 tax hikes in 1 year. The fact that they did suggests that the school district, the school board, did a fantastic job of selling this to voters because the need is there. All you got to do is drive by Jensen Beach Elementary School, take a look at the crumbling structures outside. You understand this school district needs money to help replace these schools. But that said, it's raising taxes is always a tough sell in Florida. It's been a tough sell in Martin County before. I'm stunned.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Palm City Elementary will also benefit immensely from that. Those are the 2 oldest elementary schools and perhaps schools, period, in Martin County. So they'll be getting huge renovations and basically new schools coming for those 2. So Martin County voters have spoken. They're willing to reach into their pocketbooks for schools, twice this year, in fact. And also, it's official, 100% of the precincts reporting, appointed superintendent of schools has been approved in Martin County. Also historic, that vote was rejected repeatedly by Martin County voters before. We've gone through ups and downs in the local school district in terms of approval, so to speak, of the superintendent of schools. And right now, voters have decided they want an appointed superintendent, perhaps to draw in a bigger field of candidates when we do fill that job in the future. Right now, the superintendent is the elected superintendent, Lori Gaylord, so it'll be interesting to look into what becomes of that elected seat now that this policy has changed. Certainly something we'll follow up on.
Right, and this referendum result shouldn't be seen as a referendum on Gaylord's tenure. But it's interesting, Florida remains one of the few states in the country that does elect superintendents. About 2/3 of the counties in Florida elect superintendents, about 1/3 appoint them. Now the school board will appoint the superintendent. And one of the criticisms of this drive was that if voters give up, the ability to name school chiefs directly, they're ceding a lot of authority. But the fact is, voters will still have the ability to vote for their school board members, the people who will make that choice. And they'll probably have a wider field of candidates. They'll be able to conduct nationwide searches. Previously, the elected superintendent, the only qualification was that they had to live, I guess, and be a registered voter in Martin County. Now there's going to be a much wider field that they'll be able to choose from.
Yeah, so again, pros and cons, full disclosure, our editorial board has repeatedly supported the appointed move, and in the past that support was not heeded, and this year it has been. So big changes coming to Martin County Schools, both in funding and in terms of its administration. So with that said, we're going to be joined momentarily by George Andriossi. He's a reporter here in our newsroom. He's been covering the State Senate District 25 race. That's Senator Joe Negron's seat. And welcome to you, George. How's it going tonight?
Hi, thanks for having me. Hey, Gil.
So are you seeing any early results in the State Senate District 25 race?
It's looking very, very good for Gail Harrell right now. With just about all the votes counted, she's holding a commanding lead. She just killed it in Martin County. Martin County voters came out in a big way for Gail Harrell, gave her an 18,000 vote lead.
Wow.
Rob did okay in St. Lucie County, but not nearly enough to make up for Gail's advantage in Martin County.
And that's her Democratic opponent, Rob Levy, for the folks who don't know.
And then in Palm Beach County, Rob couldn't even, do well there. So it's pretty much all over. And Gail Harrell's going to be your next state senator in District 25.
So we'll confirm those results when they are finalized, but that's interesting early look. So you covered this race ahead of time, George. Gail Harrell looks likely, at least at this point, to replace outgoing Senate President Joe Negron. What did you learn in your coverage of this race?
Well, Gail Harrell had a huge spending advantage. She outraised, Rob by about, more than 2-to-1. And he contributed a lot of money to his own campaign because, he's a physician, he's independently wealthy, so he had the money to do it. Gail also benefited from the Republican senatorial campaign, sending out 15 flyers just eviscerating Rob Levy for past missteps, kind of inflating them in a way. And also, Gail had her own, mail campaign where she was saying how wonderful she was on health care and education and the environment. And, she's a very seasoned politician. She had 2 8-year stints in the State House and a run for Congress, so she really knows what she's doing, and it showed in this election.
I have to think name recognition was huge in that race, too. And she certainly got more aggressive on river issues in recent years with the Legacy Florida legislation she passed. What do you make of this one, Gil?
Well, it's interesting. She did have the name recognition, and that might have ultimately been the decisive factor. Levy was a bit of an unknown coming in here, and when he came before our editorial board, I thought we were fairly impressed with him. But Harrell knows the district extremely well. She's been involved in the politics of the district. She has been involved in the clean water attempts to clean up the water here in our region. She's been criticized in the past maybe for not being as dogged on that issue as some others have been. But she brings a sort of admirable record when it comes to children's services and other sorts of social issues like that. So she's going to be stepping into Joe Negron's shoes. Those are pretty big shoes to fill.
They are. So of course he's the outgoing Senate president, and he supported her bid, which certainly would have helped her as well. We'll see if Gail Harrell rises to the Senate presidency. That's a real rough and tumble climb there, but of course there's no guarantees in that regard.
And Joe Negron's predecessor, Ken Pruitt, also endorsed Gail, and he was also a Florida Senate president. So
there's a long line there. We have expectations for you, Gail. So.
So interesting. Well, we'll follow up on the final results of that. The other race you're covering tonight is House District 83, and that is Gail Harrell's old seat, soon to be old seat. Tell us about who's vying for that one.
Well, on that one, I believe it's still left to be determined. The Republican is Toby Overdorf. He's an environmental consultant who's very well known in Martin County. He works for developers, and he does the environmental reviews of land. And so he knows his way around the environment for sure. The Democrat is Matt Theobald. He's a teacher at Martin County High School. And he's a Martin County native, so he also knows his way around the environment. So that was a strong issue for both candidates. As could be predicted, Martin County came out big for Toby. He won by about 6,000 votes, according to the unofficial vote totals from the Supervisor of Elections office. St. Lucie County, they are still counting votes. They were voting late at Port St. Lucie because of long lines. And so I think that race is still to be determined.
Interesting. Interesting.
Have you heard anything more about St. Lucie County voting? What went on there, or is it just a little slow?
From what we were told, there were lines at some of the polling places beyond the 7 p.m. closing time. And once you're online, my understanding is you're allowed to vote. So we'll see what the Supervisor of Election comes up with.
Interesting. The amendments had to contribute to that this time around. I remember last time we had more than a dozen amendments on the ballot. We had long lines late into the evening and late results in some counties too. So that's something to watch for tonight. It's kind of remarkable. We've got all of Martin County's results in already. Really.
Yeah. Okay.
It happens frequently. It's they're the first. It's a good operation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Theobald Overdorf race is interesting because just anecdotally, I've seen Theobald out and about numerous times over the course of the past few weeks. I think his campaign really put on a push here in the closing weeks. Overdorf, as the Republican, particularly in Martin County, as you said, he had a leg up. He just had a leg up from day one. It was going to be a big climb for Overdorf. So it's going to be interesting to see if in St. Lucie County, where registered Democrats do outnumber Republicans, if he's going to have an opportunity to make up those votes there. So,
on that note, on a related note, we do have some results up in Northern State House District. Florida House District 54 has been officially called for Aaron Grawl. I should say unofficially. The results are in unofficially for Aaron Grawl. They will be finalized later, but no big surprise there. That's a predominantly Republican district. In Indian River County, her challenger was Nicole Hagenson, a strong Democrat, but the demographics in that district just would make it challenging. So we've got 36 of 36 precincts reporting there. The results just have to be finalized later. But Aaron Grawl has won District 54, Florida House. So, what else are you watching tonight, George?
Well, that's pretty. Those are my two races. I'm really anxious to see how House District 83 turns out. I think Gil is right that there was a late push from Matt Theobald, and also Toby got a lot of support as well financially. He had a 7-to-1 fundraising advantage, and he had a bunch of his own mailers. There were some late mailers attacking Matt. I don't know the basis for those attack mailers was true. I'm kind of doubtful about that, but again. When you have the financial resources, you can make that last-minute push as well with these mailers and other forms of advertisement.
Right. Well, we'll be watching those races, and we really appreciate you taking the time out. I know it's a busy night for all the reporters in our newsroom, and it was good talking with you, George.
Thanks for having me.
George.
All right,
Appreciate
thanks
it.
a lot.
Thank you, Eve.
All right.
So we'll check in and do a recap on our results here.
That's right. Results are rolling in. We're still waiting on stuff from St. Lucie County, but we have a bunch from Martin County. We're starting to get some from Indian River County.
That's right. We have State House District 54. Aaron Grawl has won in Indian River County, and that is with all 36 precincts reporting. She has defeated Democrat challenger Nicole Hagenson.
Okay.
In St. Lucie County, it looks like we have 59 of 64 precincts reporting, so we're getting there in St. Lucie County, getting very close. Martin County, we'll do a quick recap. Stacey Hetherington has won the Martin County Commission race. She defeated no party affiliation candidate Joe Banfi by about 2-to-1, pretty huge margin there. And the half-cent sales tax for schools has passed in Martin County, as has the appointed superintendent. So lots of results rolling in.
Right. We're getting some breaking news now. In River County School Board District 4, Terry Barenberg looks to be the winner here in this race. She was running, this was a runoff election. She was running against Mershon Green. I'm sorry, no. She was running against Stacey Lynn Klim. My mistake. She looks to be the winner there in District 4. And I guess those are the only results we have so far, although it sounds as if another one's coming in right now. In Indian River School Board District 2, the winner looks to be Jacqueline Rosario, beating Mershon Green. So Rosario and Barenberg are the winners for the Indian River County School Board races, District 2 and District 4, respectively. We'll have Larry Reisman on a little bit later to talk a little bit more about the ramifications of that.
And Also, the Vero Beach City Council results, which apparently won't count. Laura Moss has been called as the winner for one of those seats.
Again, those results aren't being counted right now. There's a legal challenge underway by a candidate who was kicked off the ballot. The judge said that while he couldn't stop the election, he thought she might have a pretty good case, so there's going to be a hearing in that. Sebastian City Council race, we have Ed Dodd looks to be the winner in that race, according to our spotter here.
That's right. So we've got results rolling in quickly in all three of our counties, Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River. Of course, we're watching statewide results all night. Those will take longer because part of Florida, the Panhandle, is in another time zone.
That's right.
So those folks have just had their polls closed not too long ago. So it'll be a later evening as we watch the governor's race, U.S. Senate race, statewide amendments roll in.
Right.
But we are starting to get some solid results here on the Treasure Coast.
That's it.
And we've got one more. Indian River County Judge Group 2, Nicole Menz is the winner in that race. So local results rolling in Indian River and Martin County.
Another one to mention in Martin County we neglected is the Sewell's Point Town Commission race. It's James Campo. And Kurtz is the last name. He's one of the group of residents who has been opposed to the septic to sewer project that animated his campaign. David Kurtz and David Kurzman, not Kurtz, Kurzman. James Campo, the incumbent, and David Kurzman. New face, new voice on the town commission. Going to change a little bit of the dynamic there, I think.
So next we are actually going to be joined by our politics reporter here at TCPalm, Allie Schmitz. She's going to join us to talk about two really important races, District 8 and 18 congressional races. Come on in, Allie. How are you?
Hey, I'm so happy to be here.
Come on down. You're the next contestant on the Politics Are Right.
So we've just been going through some of the results, but of course the congressional seats will take a bit longer. So do we have any results yet in 8 or 18?
We have projected results, but nothing official yet. It appears that both incumbents are going to win these races. Congressman Posey is most definitely going to win his race. There's no possible way for his challenger, Sanjay Patel, to beat him at this point, but there are still precincts rolling in. And then the same goes with Congressman Mast, but this race has been much closer. It looks like Mast is probably going to win by about 5 or 6 points. We're still waiting on results in St. Lucie for some precincts, and also a lot of precincts still in Palm Beach County.
Okay.
So that projection, are you doing it based on the early results in both of those counties and the final results in Martin County?
We're basing it off of early and final results in Martin. Congressman Mast overwhelmingly won Martin County, so it's very difficult for Lauren Bear to catch up.
Okay. Interesting. So obviously this district was closely watched around the country. District 18, swing district. Mast has had a slight lead in the polls throughout, however, and has really ramped up his advocacy for the river, become very visible in recent weeks and months. You covered this very closely. And what stands out for you looking back on this campaign? What may have given him the edge if these results do hold up?
Definitely the river is a huge factor. When you're looking at Martin County, that is why he overwhelmingly won in this county. People are definitely looking and paying attention to what he's been doing on the environment. But then again, when you're looking at St. Lucie and Palm Beach County, it's still really, really close for both of these counties. And, you know, St. Lucie has kind of grown slightly more Republican, but it's still seen as a Democratic county. But those results are extremely, extremely close. We're to the point now where Lauren Bear might actually win the county, which is something that they were hoping for. And of course, I have my phone right now. I'm still watching results roll in, and I'm talking to staffers. But something that has not gotten as much coverage, you know, is looking at healthcare in this race. And I wrote a little bit about this, but that's something that's huge for St. Lucie County voters. There are a lot of uninsured people in St. Lucie County who, you know, they rely on Medicare and Medicaid, and they felt a little uncomfortable with how Congressman Mast was voting. So it's been interesting to watch those results roll in, but we're still waiting on Palm Beach County, so we'll see.
Was healthcare as big of an issue in Palm Beach County? I mean, what's their biggest issue down there in this race?
I think healthcare is a big issue down there, but not for the same reasons as it is in St. Lucie County. For Palm Beach County, a lot of it has to do with there are a lot of older voters who are, you know, relying on Social Security and Medicaid.
Interesting.
Can you talk a little bit about the history of this district? It has gone for different presidential choices over time. Is it truly purple?
I don't know if it's truly purple at this point. It definitely leans red now. Part of that is that white working class voters are leaning towards Republicans more than Democrats, more than they used to. But, you know, this race is still, you know, always going to be unpredictable every single year. And the reason for that is the way that Florida does their districts. You know, when it comes to districting, there are a lot of districts that are solidly Republican and solidly Democrat. District 18 is not like that. There's always the opportunity for someone, if they run a strong enough campaign, to win. And that's what happened in 2012 with Patrick Murphy. And, you know, we'll see what happens tonight, but it does appear that Congressman Mast is going to win this race. AP just called it too.
We just got some breaking news that the Associated Press has called District 18 for Brian Mast, so that means you probably have some work to do.
Right.
Do we need to let you cut out of here?
I think you do.
Thank you, Allie, for joining us. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. We'll
Thanks,
keep talking
Allie.
about this race. Take
Okay,
care.
thanks.
Awesome. We have some more breaking news. This out of Fellsmere City Council. We have 3 winners here. Fernando Herrera, Jessica Salgado, and Joel Tyson are the winners in Sebastian City Council races. Also, we have Indian River Shores Town Council. Brian Foley is the winner in that race.
Interesting.
Interesting about the masked bear race. Bear ran a very strong campaign. And I think it was interesting, you know, as Ali stated, you know, Brian Mast's advocacy for the water, which some people accuse him of sort of being a Johnny-come-lately to that issue, really did give him a leg up among people who might not otherwise have voted for the Republican candidate. But his candidacy also caused a bit of a split in the clean water movement here, particularly in Martin County. There were a lot of people who were very sort of at loggerheads over whether they could support Mast because he has voted, you know, what they consider to be the wrong way on other environmental issues. He got a poor environmental report card from some national environmental organizations and others who said, look, he's been a real sort of fighter for our water here in Martin County, on the Treasure Coast. So it's interesting. It will be interesting to see if those fences can be mended once this election is over.
Absolutely. You know, Ali said this district leans red a bit. And, you know, this is how politics should work in America. I wish every congressional district was this close because I think what happened, even if Bear ends up losing, her strong challenge forced Mast to really
Correct.
perform over the past year in a way that I don't think he would have if he hadn't had such a strong challenger, if he'd been able to coast. So we all benefit when that happens.
Right. The strong challenge from Lauren Bear forced Brian Mast to be more of an advocate for clean waters than he might otherwise have been. This district benefits from that.
Absolutely. One of her criticisms of him environmentally was that while he was clearly an advocate for local issues in our backyard, discharges into the St. Lucie River, that he's been perhaps not as vocal about environmental regulations from the EPA, other water quality regulations. So that'll be something to watch. And again, AP has called this race for Mast, so he will go on to serve a second term, and we'll watch, you know, how that shakes out. If he can really if his advocacy for our water crisis can evolve to the next level.
Right, and you know, it's a 2-year term, so he's going to have to run again in 2 years, which means that, you know, if he slacks off now, everyone's going to remember this. Everyone's going to remember that that's what he did. So, and I'm pretty sure the environmental organizations that are involved in this fight are going to do what they can to hold his feet to the fire. It'll be interesting to see how hard they have to try to do that.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
So we're going to be joined again by Rich Campbell, Martin County columnist here, and I know we have some breaking results we talked about in Martin County. Rich, I think your 2 predictions held true.
They did. I'm still shocked by the appointed school
I am too.
Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
I have no idea. As I said before, you know, efforts. There have been 5 efforts in the past, and I've written about several of them for Martin County to change the way we come about governing our schools.
Are you surprised by the tax referendum results?
No, because I think Martin County voters, I think they understood that the schools really do need more resources for capital improvements. I'm encouraged by that too.
Yeah, you know, that's a problem you could really see, in part thanks to writing by you, Gil.
Right.
I mean, you wrote about some of the problems. you have a child at Jensen Beach
Right.
Elementary where literally the building is crumbling.
Right.
How can you not, as a taxpayer, be willing to pony up a little bit more?
Right, and you know, parents and teachers were a part of the push for this because they're the ones who deal with this directly. You know, they're the ones who have kids in these schools, and they know what the conditions are. They're the teachers who teach in the schools, you know, who have to deal with facilities that are frankly just substandard compared to a lot of the other facilities on the Treasure Coast. So, you know, the push from those type of folks, I think, really probably put this over the top. So.
I do come with an interesting update on the amendments.
Okay, please.
The state elections website is updating by the minute, and of the 12 amendments, all of them but one are above the 60% threshold,
Wow.
with more than 7 million ballots cast.
So incomplete results, we should emphasize, but they all look to be trending ahead.
Incomplete, but all but one are trending over 60%. The one that isn't, and it's when I checked 5 minutes ago, it's at 58%, is Amendment 1, the proposal for the new homestead exemption.
That's surprising.
Yeah, it is surprising, but a lot of state editorial boards, including ours, argued against it because of the financial challenges that it's going to create for local governments. If you give a certain amount of people a homestead exemption, that money's got to be made up at the local level somehow. So it would have put some local governments in a financial bind.
Interesting. Amendment 4 was another one that jumped out at me this year. So restoring felons' voting rights, nonviolent felons after they've served their time and completed their parole. Florida is a real outlier in that regard. Folks who have served their time have to go to a clemency board, and there's no real set rules. It's kind of arbitrary who's granted clemency. Does that look to be ahead too? That
looks to be ahead. At the state level, I found it interesting in looking at the final tally for the amendments in Martin County. Every one of the amendments in Martin County cleared the 60% threshold, except Amendment 4.
Interesting.
It came in at 58%.
Still, though, I mean, that's significant. I'm sort of shocked that Martin County voters would en masse vote for these amendments. I mean, we're talking about changing Florida's constitution here. It's not a small thing, you know.
Yeah. If these totals hold up at the state level, it's going to be an influx of new constitutional amendments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. George Andriossi was in here earlier talking about how lines were queued up pretty late in St. Lucie County, presumably folks still filling out their long ballots, and we talked earlier about how confusing it was having those 12 amendments on the ballot. I'm hopeful that we won't have to do that again in 2 years.
Yeah, just 10 minutes ago in the newsroom, Cheryl Smith yelled out across the newsroom that there's in some precincts they're still voting in St. Lucie County.
Wow, Cheryl Smith's our politics editor, and that's incredible. In St. Lucie County, an hour and a half after polls have closed, folks are still voting.
Yeah.
That speaks to the complications of the amendment. And our editorial board, with Rich's great input, has really railed against some of these bundled amendments. You want to talk a little bit about why you think they're a bad idea?
Just because voters should be able to cast a ballot with clarity, and the bundled amendments in too many cases, the issues were unrelated. There were 3, 4, 5 unrelated issues that voters had to consider in some cases, and it was just really confusing. If I could pivot from amendments,
sure.
I did take a peek at a couple of the high-profile state races. I don't know if you guys have talked any at all. The governor's race is really narrow. DeSantis has just a very thin lead with more than 7 million ballots cast over Gillum. And Rick Scott has a very narrow lead over Bill Nelson
Interesting.
in the U.S. Senate race. So
Interesting.
those are going to really go down.
Now,
to
the
wire.
panhandle votes have yet to come in. Are they going to trend more Republican or Democrat?
I can't say either way.
It's a more conservative part of the state, for sure. I went up there to do some reporting earlier this summer, and a lot of those folks identify more with Alabama than Florida, I heard. So I think the results that come in late would tend to be more conservative.
So if we get to the point where we're waiting on those results from that part of the state and DeSantis and Scott are up, that bodes well for them.
I think that's true.
Yep.
So
Yep.
interesting results tonight. We'll
Yep.
be watching, and you may have heard our discussion briefly with Ali Schmidt's political reporter before she had to dash out, but Brian Mast has recaptured his seat in District 18, so the Republican incumbent here has won.
Interesting.
Yeah. Interesting night. Rich, thanks for joining us
Thank
again.
you.
Appreciate
All right,
it.
thanks,
Thank
Rich.
you.
All right.
Still shocked by that appointed decision.
It's interesting. It's odd. you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. We were sure that thing would have another life.
Well, as I said, there just didn't seem to be any great groundswell of enthusiasm for it. I mean, again, there were people who advocated for it, but
Yeah.
apparently they were effective.
Yeah, and we are rejoined now by Anthony Westbury from St. Lucie
Speaking
County.
of effectiveness,
Good evening.
Do you have any results to update us
Well,
on?
we are still waiting for 5 precincts.
Well, before you jump in, what's going on in St. Lucie County with voting?
Well,
Okay.
what's happening is that the lines were so long, at least one precinct in Port St. Lucie, they're still voting there as of 8:30. So that's the precinct 84.
so is this a
all
result
we're
of
waiting for.
turnout? We've speculated that maybe it's because people are confused by some of the amendments that is taking people actually longer to the process of voting.
I think it's just the volume of people. Yes, I think it's turnout.
Okay.
They had I think almost 62% turnout
Wow.
in St. Lucie.
In a midterm, that is remarkable.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
What precinct is it that's being held up at?
84 is the one I'm
Do you know where
I'm
that is
told.
by chance?
No,
Okay.
not exactly, no, I don't. But I talked to the editor in charge, and she said that the reporter said as of 5 minutes ago they're still voting.
Wow.
Okay, so we'll be up late, waiting for
Looks
St.
like
Lucie
it's
County
St. Lucie.
results.
That's right.
One
there
more
you
time.
Go. There you go.
The other races there are the 2 county commission races are pretty tight, but and Anthony Bonner and Sean Mitchell in District 2. It's Mitchell is ahead by about 2,000 votes,
Okay.
so he's got almost 51%. Bonner is 49%. I don't know how many votes we got left in those 5 precincts, but possibly, I don't know. That one is a toss-up. Franny Hutchinson and Helen Henderson in District 4. It looks to me like Hutchinson has got it. She's 51% versus 48.8. It's about 1,700 votes in it,
Okay.
but we will see about that. The sales tax looks like it's going to make it.
Oh, wow.
With those 5 precincts not reporting, 55.8% yes, 44% no, and they're about, the yes votes are 13,400 ahead. So I don't see that being overturned. So that's almost the opposite of what it was last time.
Treasure Coast voters are in a generous mood tonight. That's interesting. You know, the sales tax referendum passed in Martin County, and it looks like it's pretty well ahead here in St. Lucie County. So.
Yeah, it is interesting. We just got some information from Hannah, our producer behind the screen here, and Precinct 84 is off Becker Road in Port St. Lucie.
Okay.
So that
All right.
appears to be where the longest lines are tonight, and folks still voting as recently as 10 or 15 minutes ago there, an hour and a half after the polls closed.
Yeah.
Now, the Bonner-Mitchell race, are you surprised by that at all? There is a Democratic plurality in St. Lucie County.
Yes, there are. I think that's a party line vote more than anything else. As I said, we found it difficult to differentiate between the two on most of the issues. Mitchell has been ahead all night long. The early voting, he was substantially ahead. And in all these races, the Democrats were, and the Republicans are caught up in some places, in one. Lauren Bayer and Brian Mass. Last time I looked, there was 40 votes in St. Lucie County.
Yes.
Right.
There
Yes.
was 40 votes. He
Wow.
was ahead, and she had been ahead most of the night.
Really?
But, I heard they called the race. And
The AP has called the race, but that's an interesting tidbit there, just because there is a Democratic plurality in St. Lucie County.
got some numbers.
We do have some new county commission numbers here behind you. Anthony Bana, 48%. Sean Mitchell, 51%, it looks like. So if he holds on to that, that could be interesting. And Franny Hutchinson really pretty narrowly edging out her challenger as well. So
Yeah,
that's
considering
surprising.
Yeah.
She's a complete rookie.
Yeah.
Henderson,
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, so we're still waiting on those late results, as we mentioned, because folks were voting recently, but we'll keep an eye on that as the evening goes on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything else to update us on from St. Lucie County?
Well, I got a little story, which I'm not going to tell you the whole of it, but it'll be in my column tomorrow about this. And it's about somebody in St. Lucie County who gets the award for traveling the furthest to vote. And she flew 1,500 miles to get here. Cost her $1,000 because she could not get her absentee ballot in the country that she lives in.
Interesting.
Very nice.
She was determined to vote. She said she's very, very Democrat. And so she wasn't going to give that Trump guy half a chance.
That's how determined voters are this
She
time
said
around.
that after the elections in 2016, she was one of the very few people who kept up her resolve to leave the country if he was in power, and she has done.
And presumably she maintained her legal St. Lucie County residency as a voter.
Yes, she did.
Well, you can read about that
Read about
tomorrow
that tomorrow.
afternoon on TCPalm. We're going to have columns from all three of our county columnists, just takeaways from the elections and trends and analysis from what appears to be a really high voter turnout election. Pretty remarkable election.
Absolutely.
I think last year turnout was about 50% or in the 50s in St. Lucie County, so it's considerably higher.
Interesting.
62%.
Interesting. Interesting.
Well, thanks for joining us, Anthony.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.
Good to see you as always.
All right.
And we are going to jump back in one more time with Larry Reisman up in Indian River County. I'm going to dial him up here via Skype.
There he is.
Hey, how you doing?
Larry.
Good. Welcome back, Larry. So do you have any new results?
Yeah, a small part of me is disappointed in the St. Lucie County sales tax thing because it used to be living in Indian River County with 7%. We could go down to St. Lucie County and save about 1%.
Save a buck. No more.
So
Yeah.
you go down and buy a car, that's a pretty good little chunk of change on that first $1,000 or whatever
But-
it is.
but-
No, I'm kidding. I think
Your drive might be a little smoother heading down there. They filled the potholes.
There you go. You get what you pay for. There.
yeah. No, but that's good for if they use it wisely, that's a good thing. It's been very effective up here, and Martin County, same thing. I think it'll certainly help the schools out. But,
we got some results here in Indian River County. Rosario and Barenborg look to be the winners in the school board race. Men's looks to be the winner in the county judge race. Any of this surprise you?
I was a little surprised by the margin of victory in the men's race. You had two qualified candidates. Men's got started way early. She was the first openly gay candidate in Indian River County and traditionally Republican area, so she did well. So really none of it surprised. There's very few surprises. I thought that race would be a little closer. I was surprised the Democrats didn't do better, although, I looked at some numbers and both Patel in the Congressional race and Hagenson had more votes, and maybe this is to be expected, than any other Democratic candidate in this century. It's only 18 years, but, you get the picture. They did very well. Hagenson had the highest percentage for a state house candidate in the century with 35.63%. Those are tentative numbers. So she did pretty well, and she got way more votes than the last two state house candidates did. Both of them ran against Mayfield. Although at the same time, Erin Grawl got a ton of votes. She got more votes, she got way more votes than Debbie Mayfield ever got, although her percentage was not as high. There's just a lot of voting. There's a lot of high percentages you guys are talking about this year. Indian River County, as we speak, had 66.17% turnout.
Wow.
That compares to 54.62 2 years ago, so 12% increase.
Wow.
And as we were talking about before, I think that has to do with the Democrats getting fired up, and then I think the Republicans, after some surprises in the primary, getting fired up. I think if you look at the state numbers, you kept hearing the polls were all, for the Democratic candidates. And now, there's a slight, it's very, very close, way too close to call at this point. But they seem to be doing okay at the state level as well. And just a comparison to 2 years ago, when we had that super high turnout, it was 76.7% or 76.6% 2 years ago when Trump was elected president, 66.17 today. But if you go back to 2012, we had 77% turnout.
Really?
So just kind of some interesting numbers.
So turnout is actually lower today by 10 points than it was in 2016. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but it's 12% higher than the comparable race.
Midterm.
Yeah, the midterms 4 years ago, and it's also about 13% higher than it was 8 years ago.
So you were talking about Higginson's vote total. Do you attribute that to the fact that it was a good candidacy, a good candidate, or is that due to, so many Democrats who came out?
She only got 35.63% of the vote. Okay. So, I think she was a good candidate, but, it's hard to win in this district, as many people have found. But clearly both parties got out the vote. That's pretty clear. And I think if you go back to, I said before, if you go back to the primary, I think that the Republicans were spooked by some Democratic gains then, and they got fired up, and they got their people out, did some more advertising. You can get, when you're in power or in office for so long, you can get complacent. Right. And I think the Republicans certainly got that way, or were that way in the summer in the primary. Mm-hmm. So, I think they got their folks out today.
Interesting.
Yeah, Gil and I were talking earlier, Larry, about how in District 18, our congressional district in the southern Treasure Coast, a real strong challenger can really force the incumbent to be on his game, in this case Brian Mast, because it's such a close district. And if only all seats were this close, we could really have a better run democracy.
Well, candidates who would be forced, basically, to be more effective legislators on behalf of their districts. Because if they aren't, they're going to face a stiffer challenge by candidates who will say, this candidate hasn't done anything, hasn't done enough, So Eva's right. It absolutely does serve voters well when you have closer races.
That works
it's interesting, ways. Too. I'm going to pick a little race, a relatively small race in Indian River County, although it is a paid seat and it is a county-wide seat. The Indian River County Mosquito Control District.
You've been waiting for this.
Mr. Excitement, here we go.
There hasn't traditionally been much competition in that race. But hasn't been much. There have been relatively few races, but this year, Tom Lowther, a former county commissioner who had run once before, did really well, if my recollection serves correctly. But he was forced to run this year against a first-time candidate, Matt Erpenbach. And when you look at the results, Lowther's squeaking out with by 780 votes out of 57,000. So, Tom really put an effort, Lowther really put an effort into his race this year, as did Erpenbach. And so, even in some of these little races, you have a lot of competition. Saw a lot of these guys' signs out. And, it's one of those races you can't get a lot of publicity. We had some information on them on our website. So it was interesting. And before we go, I got to say one thing. Today was kind of a sad day in Indian River County. And you can go on TCPalm.com and find out why. David Nolte, 38 years as our property appraiser, he passed away today. And you talk about politics. He was on the Republican Executive Committee. It's tough to stay in office for 38 years, no matter what you do. And as a property appraiser, you can get a lot of people upset when their tax bills, even though he had nothing to do with that, but when their assessments go up. So I just wanted to make note of the fact that he passed today, and he would be very happy with these Republican wins in River County.
Okay.
Thank you, Larry. We appreciate your insights from our Northern Bureau in Vero Beach, and appreciate you taking the time.
Sure thing.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Right.
We have some more breaking news here. Several of the amendments, the constitutional amendments, look to have passed so far. Amendments 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 11, 12, and 13 look to have passed. Too close to call. Amendment 1, Amendment 6, Amendment 9, and Amendment 10. And if Eve knows what those all are off the top of her head, I will let her. I'll let her take the wheel here.
Jump in on a few of those for sure. So, I mean, this is really interesting. We've got Amendment 4 passing is a big deal. That's the restoration of felons' voting rights, nonviolent felons who have completed their sentences and parole. That's a big deal. Amendment 3, the gambling amendment, very confusing, some might say misleading amendment that appears to put the control in the hands of voters in terms of gambling, but actually Disney spent $20 million to get that amendment passed, so you might not get as much control as you think when big organizations like that are backing it. And then we have a bunch of our bundled amendments too, and Amendment 13, which is the Greyhound dog racing amendment, has passed. So we also have some too close to call, and we're continuing to watch these statewide races. While you're chatting there, Gil, I'm going to try to pull up some of these statewide races.
Okay, very good.
The latest results here.
Very good, okay. I said Amendment 3 has passed. Amendment 3 is the casino gambling. Amendment 4 has passed, the voting rights to felons. Amendment 5 has passed. This would require a 2/3 vote in the Florida House and Senate instead of a simple majority to raise taxes. This is going to make it harder for the state of Florida to raise taxes. A lot of people think that's a good thing. Maybe it is. It could cause problems as well. Amendment 6, too soon to call. This would expand the scope of victims' rights under the Florida Constitution. Significantly expand and delineate an array of rights, including the right to due process, freedom from intimidation and abuse, that sort of thing. Amendment 7 is passed. This would enshrine in the state constitution the mandatory payment of death benefits, certain educational expenses to qualifying survivors of first responders and military members.
Okay. So we do have some results up here now. This is the latest we've got for the statewide governor's race. Ron DeSantis right now leading by about a percentage point with not all of the votes counted yet. We have, as you can see here, 4,400 out of about 6,100 precincts reported. So Ron DeSantis with a slight lead statewide. And we have Rick Scott, our outgoing governor, also with a slight lead statewide. Again, about a percentage point. I mean, these races are neck and neck, and we've got, what, maybe 2/3 of precincts reported. So we've got a lot to go. Those are the big ones here.
Right. Those are the ones being watched nationwide. Recent polls in both cases had shown the Democrats, Andrew Gillum in the gubernatorial race, and Bill Nelson in the Senate race to be up by 2, 3, 4, 5 points. A lot of it was within the margin of error, though. So so far tonight, both the Republicans are leading, and again, results. I don't think we're seeing results from the Panhandle yet. Again, that could bode well for the Republicans.
Right. So I should mention now that all of our election coverage on TCPalm is free through midnight tomorrow night, so you can come read about the results, our local analysis of races, and get the scoop without having to hit our paywall. But we do hope you'll subscribe and support local journalism, even if you're able to get some stories for free in the meantime. So, Gil, any big surprises for you tonight based on everything we've seen?
Well, again, in Martin County, I am shocked. I'm shocked, as Rich Campbell was, that now Martin County is going to appoint rather than elect its superintendent. I'm even more sort of blown away by the fact that Martin County voters said yes to another tax hike, the second school tax hike that they've approved in the last few months. Martin County School District is, I believe, sort of at an inflection point. They needed this money. They needed the money from the August tax hike proposal, which was also passed. They're going to need to utilize these funds wisely and spend them very judiciously. I'm sure they will, and it should make a huge improvement in the physical attributes of the schools themselves. The teachers' pay is going to increase as a result of the August referendum, so it could be a huge leap forward for Martin County School District.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got one more state house race to call. Carrie Pigman has won a 4th term to the Florida House District 55 seat. That includes a western portion of our area here on the Treasure Coast. So one more race for you to call. What you point out about the tax increase in Martin County with the sales tax for schools, and it looks like St. Lucie County was poised to approve its infrastructure tax. There's an interesting dichotomy here. So in Martin County, at least, we had Republicans win in local races, and Republicans tend to be lower tax voters, and yet in the case of the schools tax, I mean, that passed pretty resoundingly. So, you know, I'm struck by that. I think it bears some digging into, and we talked earlier about how you can really see the problem with our schools, and perhaps it's a matter of really being able to prove to voters that their money is needed, and this isn't going to be spent in a wasteful manner.
Absolutely, absolutely. I should mention, too, the county commission race in Martin County. You know, every race in Martin County ultimately comes down to the issue of growth. Joe Banfi, the no-party affiliate challenger who lost, and fairly resoundingly, I guess. He was at a huge disadvantage in terms of the amount of funds raised by his opponent, Stacey Hetherington. But Banfi was one of the authors of the county's comprehensive plan. He was very much a slow growther, and he very much had the support of that constituency. Hetherington, on the other hand, you know, has promised to be more of a smart growther, but I think she's seen as, you know, someone who will look upon development proposals more friendly. She'll be more friendly to such proposals. So on the basis of the fact that she now replaces outgoing Commissioner Ed Fielding, who has been a slow growther, you have one commissioner on that board, Sarah Hurd, who will see it as her job, I suppose, to stand in the way of growth or to slow the freight train as it goes speeding down the tracks. You know, the pendulum always seems to swing in Martin County. It appears from this it's swinging pretty hard.
It is.
And it'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
It's a reminder to voters and residents to pay attention to what's going on with the county politics. And you know, that race was interesting too because it's the first time I can think of that our editorial board recommended an NPA candidate. You just don't see that many NPA candidates that give a real serious run. There was no Democrat in that race. We did recommend Joe Banfi with the knowledge, I think, in the back of our minds that Stacey Hetherington had a big advantage with her party's backing and financial backing. So she indeed has clinched that seat. So we'll see what direction the commission takes beyond the directions already shifted.
And if residents don't like it, they will have a chance to make their displeasure known the next time there's an election. So.
Absolutely. So the other big race we should talk about before we wind down here is that House District, U.S. House District 18 race. Brian Mast has been reelected to his seat, defeated challenger Lauren Baer, a Democrat who grew up in this district, southern part of this district. Her family founded the Baer's furniture chain. She had some name recognition out the gate, but in the end could not unseat Brian Mast. His river advocacy certainly played a role, and he really has worked hard and been very visible for the district in the 2 years he's been in office. Has a very compelling personal story. He's an injured war veteran, so he has won re-election to District 18. And you know, one thing I'll be watching, in addition to his river advocacy, Gil, is whether he continues to press his firearm reform legislation that he filed after Parkland. He filed legislation to re-examine what policies we should have in place in terms of tactical rifles, if you will, and that's kind of gone nowhere, and some folks thought that was an election year ploy, so we'll see if he does follow up on that, as well as the river legislation.
Right, Mast actually had an op-ed in the New York Times talking about maybe we should hit the pause button on the sale of semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15. Ultimately, you know, that proposal didn't really go anywhere, and he hasn't been a real big advocate of other proposals that might have accomplished similar things. So Eve's right. There was sort of the charge that this was an election year ploy in a purple district or you know, sort of an evenly split district to make him seem a moderate on the issue. You know, and that's something I actually did want to bring up because the gun issue does not seem to have played a major role in this election, which runs completely counter to the narrative that we were all talking about, you know, months ago when the Parkland survivors were out, you know, really stirring up the troops, really sort of generating a movement. And there was a lot of talk about how gun control was going to be a major factor in this election. It was going to be a major motivator for a lot of people. Maybe it was to some extent. But talk about that issue really seems to have faded over the last couple months. Yeah,
you know, I spent the last 6 months working on a project called Florida Voices, and we did some polling at the outset of that project. And the number one issue, of course, was economy among the Floridians we polled. And this was the end of May, early June, so early in the cycle. Number two issue was school safety. And this was not too many months after Parkland. And within school safety, school shootings, concerns about that rose to the top. So you're right, that was top of mind for a lot of voters at the time. I do think it remained a factor and perhaps contributed to the big turnout we're seeing today.
Right.
But of course, as the summer went on, as the election season went on, the environmental crisis became full-blown.
Right.
And where the school shooting issue, firearms, really seemed like the predominant one, there was definitely some competition for it at the very least.
The farther away from the actual incident that we got, the less it seemed to, remain the focus of sort of the political efforts, that sort of thing. So
as we watch results roll in these statewide races tonight, I'm curious to know which precincts are outlying. So obviously we've got some panhandle districts that are going to be later, precincts that'll be later because of the time zones. But if there are still a lot of votes to be counted in dense metropolitan areas, which is quite possible,
sure, exactly.
That issue could play a role in results there. And also, I think some of those areas will tend to favor Gillum, where the panhandle counties will tend to favor DeSantis. So we'll see what happens as the night goes on.
Right. Gillum certainly seemed to have run a very strong campaign, I think. He picked up some head of steam, I thought, as he went along. The DeSantis campaign seemed to have had a couple stumbles here and there, particularly right out of the gate. But, the results that we're seeing so far tonight, it's very, very close. So, voters have their own idea of who did a better job and, that sort of thing. So it'll be very, very interesting to see. Again, these races are being watched nationally.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to wind up our live broadcast from the TCPalm newsroom here on election night with some final results for now. Where they stand right now is DeSantis has 49.9% of the vote. Gillum has 48.9%. Again, that 1 percentage point difference.
Razor thin.
Yes, with precincts still to be counted. And Rick Scott, outgoing governor, in his bid for U.S. Senate, has 50.4% to Bill Nelson, the incumbent's 49.6%. So again, within about a percentage point. Not sure those races could be much closer.
No, and again, the polls, the last polls of sort of the election cycle here, both had Gillum and Nelson up by a couple percentage points. The end results could still turn out that way, but this election, everybody knew this election in these two cases was going to be close. I think it's closer than a lot of people thought it would be.
I agree. So we've got some work to do. Maybe there's still some cold pizza left in the newsroom.
We certainly hope so. Election night is pizza night here at TCPalm. We have a whole bunch of pizzas come in because everybody's working all night so we can produce news for you tonight and tomorrow morning on TCPalm.
That's right, and our reporters and editors are still busy at work in the newsroom. We'll be here till the wee hours, and we appreciate you tuning in. Reminder that all of our content, our stories, are free on TCPalm for the next day or so. We took our paywall down as a public service to the community, so please check out our coverage and get in touch with me and Gil and the rest of our staff.